Thank you, Mr. Jones-Sawyer, for bringing up those issues, which I didn't address in my open comments, but certainly while we legitimately lock up people who are a threat to public safety, our rate of locking them away and our methods for, in many cases, is a very strong drag on the economy, health, and welfare of the state. And while we have direct costs of corrections in our budget, there are many hidden costs throughout every area of the budget and through through our local governments, et cetera. And as Mr. Jones pointed out, there are a large proportion of our prison population who are uneducated, many illiterate, low income, and have either mental health or substance abuse issues. We'll now go to Mr. Daly.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Many of us are obviously interested in the infrastructure spending that is proposed, both in the coming year as well as over the 5-year program period. I, in particular, am interested in seeing that that money is spent in a way that not only is prudent but also puts people to work in places where there are higher rates of unemployment in our state, which are many of the counties. As a baseline here, in reading the $815 million proposed spending on infrastructure, it looks like a lot of that money is simply current spending that's being repackaged. It doesn't look like there's lots of new investment occurring over last year or the year before. So one question is, how much genuine increase is there in capital spending and maintenance spending? Let's just start with from the current year budget to the proposed next year budget. How much new spending is there?
Well, I can tell you the $815 million is all new spending. That's money that was not in last year's budget, and is all new investments, additional investments in maintenance. I recognize that it's a mere drop in the bucket to a $65 billion price tag on our deferred maintenance, but we feel like it's a prudent start. And invests in our state park system, at the critical infrastructure that houses individuals in the state, in our state prisons, state mental hospitals, the developmental centers, also funding for the judicial branch. Some of our courts are very aged and are in need of repairs. Also, the state special schools, fire stations around the state that house our state firefighters. So there's significant needs. We recognize that this is a first step. It's an $815 million investment, but that's certainly more than was provided last year or prior years because of the fiscal downturn.
I'm not doubting your statement, but I'd like that to be affirmed by the LAO. Is the $815 million over and above the spending level in the current budget?
Well, I believe that's the case, but you may have been asking a slightly different question. That is, would some of those monies have been spent anyway? So, for example, the repayment of the loan early to Caltrans, those are monies that in the future may have gone to Caltrans for SHOP payments. So you changed the timing of it. So I didn't know, Mr. Daly, if that's what you were getting at. But clearly, a lot of the money is been redirected. It could have been spent for other purposes, one-time Prop 98 purposes or ongoing Prop 98 purposes. And clearly, the $100 million for the general fund is new.
Thank you, and I appreciate your rewording. The point I'm driving at is in this substantially large amount of one-time funds available to us, and I agree with most of the thrust of the spending of that. How much is truly going to infrastructure? With a follow-up question or a follow-up point being, it would be ideally those investments will put people to work. This will have to be fleshed out over the coming weeks and months, but that's something that I will be focused on beyond the questions that have already been raised about the infrastructure plan, which there's a lot to like about it. I just want to get down to how much increased spending is there really, and where will it go? So I appreciate your response.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning to you. I want to add my name to the list of those who have reflected upon those of us who preceded my class in the legislature and had to make the difficult cuts. And I want to add to those comments the understanding that those of us in the freshman class didn't come here from nowhere. We experienced the cutbacks from a different perspective. Many of us came from local government. In fact, I think the large majority of us came from local government, school boards, city councils, and boards of supervisors. So we bring with us collectively a variety of perspectives from which we understand the history of the budget. There are three areas that I want to just mention that are important to me, but a couple have already been mentioned, and actually all of them have already been mentioned, and I don't expect you to answer further questions on them, but I'll be particularly interested in. One is, of course, the courts and the cuts to the courts, which have already taken place, and the $105 million, while welcome additional funds for the courts, as I understand it, does not bring them to a place where there will not be further cuts to services throughout the state of California and further reductions to access to justice. So that in and of itself is cause for concern, but I also don't understand the planning and the thought for the road forward. I think everybody seems to recognize the need to improve access to justice, particularly given the cuts that have taken place recently, and that's a place where I want to get. Secondly, there has been discussion about cap and trade. In particular, the two issues that are of particular concern to me are welcome news that $100 million of the $500 million from last year is being repaid. But as we asked last year, what is the repayment schedule for the remaining $400 million? Secondarily, the $250 million that is proposed to be allocated for high-speed rail. I continue to have great concerns over whether or not that squares with the constraints of AB 32 and the requirements for the use of cap and trade money to achieve climate reduction before 2020. And finally, excuse me, with respect to the infrastructure finance districts, there is a provision that hasn't been mentioned yet that requires that would preclude any city that is in litigation with the state of California from receiving the benefit of infrastructure finance districts, and I think that is a topic that we need to have a conversation about, and I'll just leave it at that. I think it's a very technical conversation on one level, but there is also a significant concern that the very communities that we propose to benefit would have to give up significant legal rights, which we can argue whether or not their cases are justified or not. But I think that it's a pretty heavy hammer that the administration is suggesting. I would like to ask, and I realize we only have a brief time here this morning, and I'll try to make this quick, but there are three areas that I would ask for responses today. One, starting with the rainy day fund, I think it is broadly understood to be a good idea. The legislature has proposed it. The administration's proposal is virtually identical to that that is in the blueprint proposed by the Assembly last year. But we're constantly referring back when we talk about the rainy day fund, one of the reasons, I think it's a good idea no matter what, but one of the underpinnings, one of the reasons for having a rainy day fund is the tax volatility that we have in an antiquated tax system. And I'd like to ask what the administration's thought is on where we go from here with respect to our tax structure, and what the administration plans to propose in terms of modernizing tax structure so that we are not overly reliant on good years versus bad years, and things can be evened out over time. We talk a lot about how antiquated it is, but nobody seems to be willing to say, we've got to fix this. Let's figure out the pathway to do that. Secondarily, there is always a lot of discussion about the future debt that we've incurred, and I'll bring this issue up on behalf of my two children and those similarly that they represent, that they're similarly situated. My kids are in their mid-20s now, and my understanding is that we're facing a potential future debt, if we do nothing, of $600 billion down the road that severely threatens the fiscal integrity for their generation. We're talking about, or at least there's some thought has been given to implementing a 30-year plan for righting the ship, if you will. My children will be only slightly younger than I am today, as I sit here today. So we really need to get started on this. And the LAO has proposed that it would be a good idea for us to set aside some money in the current budget year and get the discussions that I think the governor has appropriately called for amongst the parties, the interested parties, going, why aren't we doing that quickly, and why isn't it a good idea to set aside some money as the LAO suggests? And finally, the budget proposes, on the transportation side of things, the budget proposes that we spend down the remaining Prop 1B funds that are available. And we are here today at a time when we have a projected decline of approximately $1 billion over the next 5 years and on transportation funding, and yet our population in the state is projected to grow 7%. So if you could comment on how we can address that, I'd appreciate it.
All good questions, and none with simple answers. The first one, in terms of why or if we've thought about tax reform, I would say absolutely. There's been many studies over the past decades about how to modernize or change the state's tax system. It's all difficult, which is why it hasn't gotten done yet, I would say. But we recognize that the state's income tax structure is progressive, which is why I think we're even more certain that a strong and lasting rainy day fund is necessary, because those at the highest incomes in our state have very volatile income sources. They have capital gains, which we've talked a lot about today, but also bonus income, dividend income, annuity income. These are all things that, when we look at the data, are very volatile. And we have a very difficult time, both ourselves and the LAO. We have lots of conversations about how to forecast these things better and more accurately. But, it's difficult because we can't, our models can't predict all human behavior. So we have thought about it, but this year our approach is really about building a lasting rainy day fund that can really help smooth out some of those spikes in revenue. The second issue about STIRS, the State Teachers Retirement System, which we do dedicate some discussion to in the A pages, because we're absolutely very serious about tackling what has been a very long-standing issue that everyone knows is out there, that really does need to be addressed. And the teachers are absolutely the foundation of our educational system, and this problem does need to be addressed. We are planning to hold stakeholder meetings this year. It's complicated. There are incentive structures that we need to get right, because we don't set retirement benefits here at the state level, but we do have some role in funding schools, obviously. So this is where the discussions really need to begin, and are complicated. I'll turn it over to Richard for a little.
And if you could focus just a little bit of attention on the LAO's proposal that we set aside some money in this fiscal year.
Richard Gillihan, Department of Finance. So with respect to the LAO proposal, I think our view at this point in time is the administration's plan is to pursue a solution. It's a shared responsibility, a responsibility shared by teachers, by their employers, which are the school districts and the state. And so until we have these discussions and we reach sort of a broad consensus on how we're going to shore up the funding of the system, it's a bit premature in our view to set aside funding now until we have sort of a broad commitment on a plan forward.
I would just agree with my colleague on that. I think that the plan does not include a set-aside at this point. We do put money in the rainy day fund and our special fund for economic uncertainties. That is where I think we feel like we need to be this year. Finally, on your question about transportation, which is a very complicated, how do we plan for a state that has 50 million people in it, as opposed to what we have now? It's hard to imagine, given how crowded the roads are today. And that's a big underpinning about why the governor is pursuing the high-speed rail program. It is big. It is different than what we have in California now, but it is necessary to really plan for that population growth into the future. And if we weren't doing the rail, we would have to look at similarly sized investments in roads and airports that are all very difficult. So I think the rail is something that is in many other developed countries in the world, and has been met with great success in those other places. And we continue to be committed to that being a big part of our future infrastructure here in California.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if I might just ask one brief follow-up question of Mr. Taylor. Mr. Taylor, why do you believe it's a good idea for us to set aside some money in the current budget on the CalSTRS issue?
The issue goes beyond even CalSTRS. Obviously, we have retiree health, we have UC, we have lots. And we agree with the administration. This should be on CalSTRS. It should be a shared responsibility. I think the state's going to have to play a major role, so we don't know the amount. But let's put this in perspective. STIRS is talking about a 30-year plan that would require about $4.5 billion a year. In our November document, we suggested, well, we realize you can't do that all at once. This is past problems. You're paying for past sins here, but it's something we think you have to do, and so we suggested, well, start with setting aside $500 million, step up to $1 billion the next year. This is the time when you have money, and you got to start somewhere. So I'm not sure it's at all in conflict at all with the administration's approach to just say, well, we're going to start building it up. It actually might help in the negotiations as a sign of good faith that the state is willing to chip in. It's not going to be all put on teachers and districts. So we just think both practically but fiscally it would be very prudent. You're not spending it. You're just setting it aside and saying, look, in thinking about what's remaining in your reserve, that's what you need to guard against your volatility of your system in general. This is just another set aside for costs that have already been incurred you need to start paying for.
Thank you.
Excuse me, we have Mr. Ting, Mr. Mullen, Ms. Melendez, and others to follow.
Great. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just wanted to say, to echo my freshman colleagues' comments, and frankly, how fortunate and thankful we are to be here under much better budget circumstances. Serving on the Budget Subcommittee on Education, it was great to work with Finance last year on the implementation of LCFF, which I think is going to be a wonderful program for our schools statewide. I did have two other specific questions, one regarding higher education. I did notice that there was more money set aside for Cal Grant to deal with the increasing number of Cal Grant for the folks participating in Cal Grants. But there was no additional augmentation of, in particular, Cal Grant B, which is targeted to the lowest income students. In the past, when that was first started, the program was really there to help cover fees and also some books and other costs. Now the amount is so low it doesn't even cover books. So did have interest in hearing what your plan is around Cal Grant, but also for the lowest income students. I was very excited to see the budget line item around alternative vehicles out of the cap and trade money. Would love to hear more about what specifically you were thinking in terms of incentives, or where you are planning to direct that money.
Sure, I'll answer your higher education question first. As you know, Cal Grants are an entitlement in California, and we're very proud of that program. Also, I would highlight that this year is the first year of the Middle Class Scholarship, which was a significant new investment in the Cal Grant in student assistance to go to universities. And so with that, big new investment last year, there wasn't additional monies for additional large new ongoing investments for the same reasons we've been discussing today, that we think a lot of the monies that are building up the surplus are fleeting and are not appropriate to fund ongoing commitments. We do have a few items in the budget that I'll turn over to Nick that do, I think, correct some of the issues that were unintended consequences of some of the actions we've taken during the last couple of years.
Yes, thank you. So the main thing we've got in the budget is additional funding and language around the proposal or the action taken a couple of years ago to for students that say their income increases or other circumstances change and then they become ineligible for the program. Existing law does not allow them to, if they become eligible again, to enter back into the program. So we are proposing to allow that over the period of 4 years, the normal span of a academic career. We would allow students to re-enroll in the program. So that is a significant policy change this year. But we are putting significant new money into the Cal Grant program because of increased eligibility, to ensure that's fully funded, and to implement the Middle Class Scholarship Program.
So there is also, on your alternative vehicles, there is $200 million in the cap and trade program for low-income vehicles, and I'll let Matt Almy give you more specifics, because we are proposing a few different things this year.
Hi, yes, Matt Almy, Department of Finance. There's really kind of three components of the $200 million dedication for clean transportation and cap and trade. First is to expand the clean vehicle rebate program to provide incentives to for the purchase of clean passenger cars. The second is demonstration projects for clean freight with a particular focus near ports and trade corridors in disadvantaged communities. That's intended to align with the requirements for using cap-and-trade to benefit areas near disadvantaged communities, and so that's the focus on the ports. And then the other focus in terms of disadvantaged communities, ports, and trade corridors would be the third piece, which is hybrid and electric truck deployments. So kind of getting away from the diesel trucks, but to more kind of clean trucks.
Thank you. Mr. Mullen, I noticed there was a school group from your district. Perhaps you could, even though they're not here now, let us know who they were.
I had to step out to welcome the Our Lady of Angels School in Burlingame, so thank you for your indulgence, Madam Chair. I will be brief. First of all, thank you both for your comments today. I want to associate myself with the comments of Assemblymember Bloom, referencing both the need for serious tax reform as well as addressing the long-term unfunded liability. In particular, of concern to me is STRS, as Mac referenced earlier today. I, for one, would prefer that we make an early investment now. As a member of the PERS committee, it wasn't too long ago that it was a $75 billion unfunded liability. Now we're very quickly to $80 billion and on the escalator up. So just in terms of generational equity, we must address that. We have an obligation to do so. My questions are related to sustainable community strategies and affordable housing. SB 375, as you know, is a central component of the state's efforts to address climate change. And as I understand it, for the first time, the state is actually considering a funding source to help regions implement 375, which is certainly good, but it's a relatively small chunk compared to some other line items in the budget. Will there be future movement on that issue? Perhaps consideration of expedited repayment of the $400 million loan balance on cap and trade? And then I will just ask that you address an associated issue, and that is the lack of an affordable housing policy or strategy in the state of California. There's nothing discernible that I can detect in this budget regarding how the state is going to address affordable housing. As somebody who hails from the Bay Area region, this is front and center. There's not a day that goes by that I don't hear about the need around affordable housing, and the state as a whole is absent on policy development on that issue. Bond funds have been drawn down. And can DOF reference both of those items?
Yes, so there is $100 million for sustainable communities, which is a program that I think we're really excited about because it is something new. It's really building on the tenets of SB 375 and bringing housing and transportation and other interests to the table to collaboratively work on strategies that can improve and develop more sustainable and walkable communities. And so I think that we put $100 million, recognizing that it is a small amount when you're talking about big infrastructure projects and you're talking about a state as big as ours. But I think the thought was that this was a beginning of a conversation, that there would be future monies available for future allocations as the program really got developed. And do you have anything else, Matt?
I would just echo those comments and just to build on it. The intent is the $100 million would also leverage existing funds. It could be existing state programs for, say, active transportation or farmland conservancy program, those types of things, as well as leveraging local funds that they were going to dedicate for sustainable communities as well.
And while we are supporting efforts to really help locals with implementing these new, more sustainable strategies, we do recognize that land use decisions are really at the local level, and that includes the siting and development of housing. And while the state has had roles in providing bond funds, the role of locals and really getting that housing done is something that we recognize in the budget. But But we understand the issues that affordable housing is really acute issue in many areas, and overall, our state's allocation of Section 8 housing from the federal government is probably less than other states get, which puts us at a disadvantage. So because of the high cost of housing in California, and so it doesn't go as far here. So we recognize that there are hardships that are created by that, and we would be happy to get back to you with more on that issue.
Thank you. Now we'll hear from Ms. Melendez, and then Ms. Weber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the report. This is all very good comments from my colleagues. I do have a question with respect to public safety, because I'm looking at this and it looks as though the budget is betting on clemency from the federal courts with respect to the timeline for the prison population cap. So if we don't get the extension, then it appears the plan is to procure out-of-state beds. But we are prohibited from doing so absent a court order allowing us to do that. So I'm trying to understand what the plan is, because it seems like a bit of a house of cards with respect to this population. Can you speak to that, please?
So you're correct that we are assuming a 2-year extension to meet the cap in this budget. If that, for some reason, does not occur, we are prepared to use the funding that was provided via SB 105 last year to procure additional beds, whether they be in-state or out-state. I mean, the trouble that we have is building new beds in-state is near impossible to do quickly. And so the flexibility that's allowed by going into the contract beds is a necessary thing that we have to do in the short term in order to avoid any early release of the most serious and violent inmates that are in our state prisons today.